Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm excited to be here today with Jeff Wald, who is the author of The End of Jobs, The Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. And Jeff is also the founder of Work Market, which he founded 10 years ago and was acquired by ADP a couple years ago. I'm looking forward to hearing that. Work Market's an enterprise software platform that enables corporations to efficiently and compliantly organize, manage, and pay freelancers. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Will, thank you so much for having me. It is great to be here.
Let's talk about Work Market. So 10 years ago, people were, there were freelancers and independent consultants. I got into it in 2008, but not as big of a thing as it is now. What got you thinking about setting up software to manage freelancers back in 2010 timeframe?
Well, as with a lot of things that I do, Will, I'm driven by data, and the data was telling us that the freelance market, the on-demand market writ large, was growing very quickly and was becoming an increasingly important part of the labor force. And the data also said that companies lacked the systems and processes to manage on-demand labor at scale. And that was one of the big impediments to an even greater growth of that sector. So when you look at problems as an entrepreneur, you want to try to solve a big problem, and this was a $1 trillion problem. So seemed like a pretty good thing to go after.
Yeah. Now, my understanding of Work Market in terms of the description I've read is that it's around compliance and efficiency. Do you also help clients discover the freelancers, or do they mainly come with their freelancers already discovered and then use your platform to kind of do all the compliance and manage them? Or is it a marketplace like, let's say, Upwork?
Well, there's so much to unpack in that question. So many of the things that we messed up as a company. It's funny. I often say to people, of the 10,000 mistakes I made while building Work Market, the first was calling it Work Market, because it implies that there is a marketplace. And every time you go into a sales meeting, a sales discussion, and say, look, we're not a marketplace. We're here to help you be efficient. We're here to help you be compliant. We're here to help you organize, manage, and pay. And look, is there a marketplace? Sure. There may be 1 million people in the marketplace. But the vast majority of people that use Work Market are in private environments because companies bring their own freelancers and they use our software to manage them. And so it is confusing, and that lies with nobody but me. But I think there's a better question to be had around what the market needs. Does the market need more platform technologies that help with efficiency and compliance, or does it need more marketplace companies that help with discovery? And I think there's a substantive case to be made on both fronts.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about, from the enterprise perspective, what are some of the challenges that companies face in managing freelancers? Most of the listeners of this show are on the other side. We're independent consultants, mm-hmm. And maybe we just don't have that much intuition or insight into what companies are facing when they bring on freelancers. We talk about some of those issues.
It's a great question. So as we talk about companies that have not engaged a freelance population, we'll tell them, you're missing out on so much great talent. You're missing out on an important part of the labor force. For those that have done it but haven't really formalized it or done it at scale, the big issues are compliance and insurance. So from a compliance standpoint, they want to be comfortable that if they're engaging Sally Smith as a freelancer, that they're not going to inadvertently engage her in a way that causes Sally, that causes a state regulatory agency, that causes a federal regulatory agency to think that Sally might be an employee. Right? They can't have that. And most companies, and when I say most, well, I'm saying like 99%, are not sitting there thinking, how do we screw Sally? How do we, engage her but not pay her benefits? That is not what most companies do. Mm-hmm. They say, oh, I want to engage Sally, but how do I dot my I's and cross my T's here when the patchwork of regulation is complex confusing and contradictory. What is okay in Wisconsin may be completely not okay in Tennessee. It's tough to run a business that way. So it's a very long-winded way of saying the more that Sally can demonstrate that she is truly an independent business, meaning she's got a website, she's incorporated, she has business insurance, a separate business checking account, a separate business location, all the things that make it look like the reality that Sally is an independent business providing a service, the better off Sally's going to be, because ABC Corp is more comfortable engaging with Sally. The other thing that we find to be a big impediment is one of the things I just mentioned, which is the insurance component. This idea that if I'm going to work with ABC Corp has to be comfortable that if I hurt myself, if I hurt somebody else, if I cause property damage, that ABC Corp isn't going to be on the hook. And so it is often difficult for the independent professional to go and get $10 million of errors and omission insurance and professional liability insurance and a general liability policy and things like that. But those are the things that when you work with big companies, they need to make sure that they're covered.
Yeah.
And so whether it's taking the steps to kind of protect them from a compliance issue or whether it's taking the steps to protect them from an insurance issue, those are the kinds of things that are the big impediments to companies engaging freelancers.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll jump in there. I haven't seen a requirement of 10 million before. Some companies may require it, but I have seen clients that require 5 million in cyber insurance, and that's the really expensive one. You can get general liability insurance or professional insurance, but the cyber insurance really expensive. So, and some require 5 million of that, which, you know, it really is quite expensive for an individual. So how does Work Market solve that? Do the freelancers become like W-2 employees of Work Market, or do they just stay as 1099s, but you like the company like vets them very hard and make sure that they have an LLC of their own? Or so how do you address that compliance issue?
So here's how we address it. Well, we say to ABC Corp, XYZ Corp, come onto the platform and set up your labor clouds, one of the core functionality of Work Market. And whatever you determine to be the right line of who you want to engage with using the labor clouds and how you want to engage using our engagement tools, our system allows you to set it and forget it. So it's not up to me to go out there and tell Sally Jones and Joe Johnson to go get this insurance or that insurance or do this or that, because I have no idea what different companies want. So because different companies view this so differently, because it so depends on their risk tolerance, on the jurisdictions in which they do work, on the type of work they do, on the type of work they're engaging freelancers to do, we set up a system that allows them to set the line that they think is appropriate. If they want in their labor clouds to set it up such that only people that are incorporated can get in, great. Then you will not be able to get into the labor cloud and therefore do work for ABC Corp if you don't have an EIN, if you're not incorporated, right? The system won't allow it. If ABC Corp wants to set up a rule that says, you know, you can't set the time for Sally, Sally has to set her own time, Sally has to negotiate the rate, or other ways of engaging, Sally can't be on one of our locations, she can only go to a client location. Those are the not the who you engage with, but the how you engage them. And those are all these engagement rules. And if ABC Corp wants to set up that rule, great. Then Sally has to tell ABC Corp what time she's going to show up. Because the control of saying show up at 8 a.m. is something that some companies don't want to do. They just say, hey, we need this work done. You tell us when you're showing up.
Right.
So that's a very different way of engaging. And we build the tools to enable ABC Corp and XYZ Corp to set and then forget the who and the how. And then it's up to the freelancers on the platform and the freelancers they engage to say, oh, if I want to work and get into the labor cloud of ABC Corp, I better go get that insurance. And then, of course, we give them a button to click to go and get it very easily. But to your point, Will, it is expensive.
Okay. So it's really a software platform. It's not like some other organizations that will actually kind of be the intermediary contracting vehicle. So like TapFin with Manpower is one of those where they will be the one that contracts with a subcontractor. And some cases as a 1099, in some cases, some other firms may actually employ the person as like a temporary W-2 employee. So you're providing more of a software platform for companies to use to manage the whole thing.
You are 100% correct. And what's interesting is that the TapFins, the Pontoons, the Randstad SourceRights, some of those bigger MSPs are actually clients of WorkMarket. They use our software to service their client base to help manage that population efficiently and compliantly. We are just software though. We're connecting point A and point B, and that's all we do.
Something that I don't really ever experience just from the outside as a, consultant is what are some of the pain points internal to companies around the paying freelancers? Like, how does that work internally, and how does your software help?
Ooh, a lot going on there too. One of the pain points is that this payment typically goes through accounts payable. And accounts payable has very specific terms, which might be 45 days, 60 days. We have one client on WorkMarket whose payment terms are 90 days. You do one job for them for $1,000, you'll get that $1,000 90 days from now.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
That might be fine. If you're a vendor, it's less fine if you're a person trying to put food on the table.
Yeah.
So the payment terms and dealing with accounts payable are one. The kinds of things that accounts payable needs in order to sign off on a payment. They can't just say, get a call from somebody in a division saying, hey, we need to pay Sally Smith $1,000. They need to, where's the contract? What's the PO number? What's the GL code it's against? Where are the deliverables? Have we billed the client? So what we enable is we enable via API the assignment that ABC Corp sends to Sally Smith to immediately turn into an invoice upon the appropriate deliverables being uploaded by Sally, meaning nobody at ABC Corp can say, we're good, close the assignment and have it turn into an invoice until all the deliverables that ABC Corp, procurement and legal and HR and finance have set up have been met. So it enforces that compliance along that parameter. And then that assignment automatically goes to the accounts payable department with all the right data that they needed, whether that data, again, was a sign-off sheet, whether it was pictures of the deliverable, whether it was a GL code, a PO number. Again, it can't go through our system unless all the appropriate steps have been taken. And that allows for a much more efficient payment. We have a very large media company that used this, and they used to take on average 8 weeks to pay people, not because they had an AP policy. It just took so long for stuff to get done. And once we streamlined everything for them, it took 8 hours. 8 hours just being the average back and forth time it was for the freelancer to upload the deliverables, click OK, for it to go to a project manager that was assigned to it, for them to review the deliverables and click accept. And so that is one of the big pain points of companies, is just the internal process. And by streamlining that process, we're able to create efficiencies for the company and, importantly, for the freelancer.
Yeah. So as a consultant, I only see the side where, okay, I've signed a contract. I have the senior individual I'm serving, we've got the contract signed. And then maybe at the end of the project, or, if it's a monthly, at the end of the month, I send an invoice in. What's happening on the other side there? In some cases, the client will ask me to put a purchase order number on there. I'm like, okay, well, you tell me, I don't know, send me the purchase order. Right. In some case, they don't, but maybe they're handling that. This is such a naive question, but what's going on? Like, what exactly is a purchase number, and how do those things typically get created? Why do they need to get put on invoices? So walk me through that process. Like, walk me through a typical payment process at a client. So they've received an invoice from a consultant for $50,000. There is a contract. What are all the steps that are typically happening on the other side at accounts payable to get that thing paid?
Well, the first thing I'll say, Will, is that there is no typical.
Okay.
Every company does this differently. my life would have been so much easier building work market if there was a typical and a standard the way everybody did it. Unfortunately, everybody does this stuff differently. So here's what has to happen, and they're basically all within this confines of what are called internal controls. If you're a big company and you're writing checks for $50,000 for something, you need to be 100% certain that that contract was signed appropriately, that the appropriate approvals were done, that the appropriate people signed off for it, and that you're following, a host of different regulations and money movement concerns, and then that money is being sent to the right person. And so what we had to build were a series of approval flows that are customized for each, or configured, I should say, as each company sets up their work market account. So it might be that every single invoice needs to have a purchase order attached, meaning that they can relate it back to something in a purchase system that says, Jeff Wald asked Will Bachman to perform this task, and it's in the system, meaning that a legal document does back it up. Secondly, they may want to attach a GL code so they understand, where does that $50,000 that's being paid to Will get charged? We are moving billions of dollars around. We need to account for every single penny. And so those are things that allow companies to understand, was this legitimate? Because unfortunately, billions and billions of dollars are stolen through fraud every year. And we had to build systems into work market, those configurable approval flows, where it might be somebody in legal that has to approve an invoice over X. If the invoice is in this department, it has to go to a different department before someone approves it. You want to avoid the situation where Jeff Wald sends an invoice to somebody named Will Bachman. Jeff Wald then approves it. Jeff Wald then makes the payment, and nobody else at my company has any idea what I just did. I could have just made up a guy named Will Bachman.
Yeah.
They don't know. And so that stuff does happen. And we had to build a series of fraud alerts within the system, that if you have an employee that is the sender of the assignment, the approver of the assignment, the approver of payment, that bubbles something up. If they do it all very quickly, and even if they're different people, that bubbles up. Because if somebody sends an assignment, approves an assignment, and approves a payment all within 1 minute, highly unlikely that that person on the other end actually did that work in 1 minute. Possible. Could be something where, oh my God, we forgot to pay Will. We got to create an assignment and do all that stuff. Possible. But if those kind of things are happening, I want to bubble that up to the appropriate administrator within the account and show them, because the reason that there are PO numbers and GL codes and approval flows is to dot your I's and cross your T's, to count all your money and to make sure that it's going to the right places and nobody's stealing it.
What do you see as kind of the top 2 or 3 or 4 trends around, engaging freelancers over the next couple of years? What are people talking about when you talk to corporations, that are on their mind about engaging freelancers for their companies? What do you see happening?
There are 2 things that I'll point to. One is skills gaps, and 2 is the regulatory environment. So the skills gaps, well, look, there are just certain skills where there's supply and demand imbalance. There are more people that need cybersecurity experts and e-commerce people and blockchain people and data people and coders and things like that than there are people with those skills. And whenever we see that in the course of the labor markets, what we see is a lot of people tend to work in a freelance context. They say, well, I'll come and work with you whenever I want. And so that actually drives a big skills gap because of the supply and demand imbalance, and that skills gap tends to get filled with a big freelance population. That happens obviously at the high end of the freelance market. The second big trend is regulation. You and some of your listeners may well be aware that California passed a law last year, went into effect January 1st of this year, called AB 5, Assembly Bill 5. So an AB 5 was designed to tighten up the definition of who's an employee. Because in California, we had Uber and Lyft and Postmates and DoorDash and a bunch of other companies that an argument was being made that they were running fast and loose, treating people as employees, even though they were classified as independent contractors. And that bill, as legislation tends to do from time to time, some believed it overreached and caused a contraction in companies' engagement with freelancers. Now, we won't really know because the bigger impact of everything was obviously the pandemic. But there's a lot of talk about changes to that bill. There are a lot of other states that would have passed bills similar to AB 5 if not for the pandemic. Clearly, they all had now other things to worry about. So the regulatory environment and that headwind to the freelance market is very, very powerful. And as we think about the freelance market over the next 5 to 10 years, if regulation follows the path of AB 5, I would argue pretty strongly that the on-demand market will see a contraction over the next 5 to 10 years. And regulation is the main driver of that.
Let's talk a little bit about your book, The End of Jobs. What's your argument there? You say the rise of on-demand workers in agile corporations. Tell me a little bit about your argument.
Well, I'll tell you this. Well, the book started out because I got very frustrated with people making predictions about the future of work that were not based on evidence, that weren't based on the data, that weren't based on the history of work, that weren't based on how companies actually engage workers. And the biggest culprit of this, by the way, was in the on-demand market. In 2010, I don't know if you remember this, but everybody that was talking the future of work was saying, oh, by 2020, 50% of the labor force is going to be on demand. And I remember thinking, no, that doesn't make any sense. That's not remotely accurate. But that's what everybody said. And it was based off of literally the growth rate from 09 to 010, I think uncovered by the Freelancers Union. And everyone took that 1 year growth rate and threw it out the next 10 years and said, oh, it'll continue growing at 5% a year, 10% a year, whatever it was. And therefore, it'll become 50%. You're like, what? That's not how statistics work. That's not how analysis works. That's not what has ever happened in the history of labor. And so I wrote the book to kind of bring a framework around looking at these evidence points, history, data, how companies actually engage workers, to make some thoughtful predictions on the future of work. And in my mind, it was very important to do that because we're at the crossroads of a very, very important change with the increasing prevalence of robots and AI and the impacts that they may have on the labor market. So that's what the book is about. It's about taking that look and making some thoughtful predictions. But more importantly is that I gathered 20 of the leading men and women that are actually shaping the future of work to give their predictions on what the world of work looks like in 2040. That was by far the most fun part of the book, mostly because I didn't have to write it.
Now, you mentioned that 50% statistic, which I think we both agree sounds is far-fetched, maybe a long time before anything reaches that. What's your sense of, among sort of white-collar office workers, what percent do you think will be either contractors or consultants or some sort of freelancers, in sort of the 5 to 10 year time frame?
It's a really, really good question. There are, it's very difficult to make these predictions. The freelance market, there's not a huge amount of data on the freelance market. And when we start to subdivide the market, the data gets even more scarce. So that said, we have pretty good evidence that between 25 and 30% of the labor force operates in an on-demand capacity. We have pretty good evidence that a large portion of that is at the high end of the market. And that is the part of the market that is growing because regulation is not there to help a consultant making $200,000 a year. They don't need the government to protect them from abuse. They have enough market power that they can take care of themselves. Regulation is needed when there is a huge market imbalance, and companies have every incentive to take advantage of workers, as in the case of an Uber driver, some of whom effectively make $6 an hour, and that's not okay. So the regulatory environment shouldn't touch the high end of the market that much. The high end of the market will continue to grow. Will it grow in a freelance context or a temp context? Tough to say. But I think it will certainly grow in the areas where there is supply and demand imbalance on those very technical skills. That's where the market will grow the most.
Now, you've got a chapter in the book. Chapter 7 is what on-demand labor teaches us about the future of work. Share some of the lessons that you have about the future of work.
Sure. So, I called the book The End of Jobs, Rise of On-Demand Workers and Agile Corporations. And the rise of on-demand workers, a lot of people intuit and say, oh, does that mean everyone's going to be an Uber driver? And the answer to that is a hard no. Everyone is certainly not going to be an Uber driver. What it tries to illustrate is that all of the things that the on-demand worker faces today, the total personal responsibility for healthcare, retirement, training, development, the task-based work, algorithms allocating work, data-driven HR, remote work, always-on work, those tenets that the Uber driver knows all too well, right? Uber driver is given work based on tasks. Take Jeff from point A to point B. The data is the only HR interaction they have. Did I get there on time? Did Jeff give me 5 stars? All of those things. The work is allocated via an algorithm. It's not like an Uber driver goes into the office and says, hey, what's my route today? It's go pick up Jeff because you're the closest and blah, 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 blah. So all of those things are permeating the full-time workforce. Every worker is going to become an on-demand worker in as much as workers in full-time jobs today are increasingly seeing data-driven HR. They're increasingly seeing algorithms allocating work. They're increasingly seeing that they have responsibility for their retirement, their healthcare, their training, their development. And all of those tensions from remote work to always on work are going to be the problem of every worker in the future of work. They are not just the on-demand worker that faces those things. And so that's what I talk about when I say the rise of on-demand workers.
You talked about skills and being responsible for your own skills. That's something that, really comes home to you, when you strike out as an independent consultant, that you no longer have a firm that's sending you to the annual kind of 1-week offsite training session. Mm-hmm. What do you see as full-time employees like needing to take more control over their own professional development?
So, whether it's the defined benefit pension plan, becoming the defined contribution plan, becoming a 401k with a match, becoming 401k with less of a match, that's an area where we have some statistics. When we talk about the anecdotes of there used to be IBM University and employees used to go down there for 2 weeks for refresher courses and things like that. But when we look at IBM today, they say, well, you have to do 40 hours of online training on your own time. Right. So over a 30-year period, it went from 2-week training junket and fun and good times to figure out on your own time 40 hours to upskill. That is an area we don't have a lot of data, but we have anecdotes. It illustrates how workers need to constantly be mindful of their own skills. And importantly, again, this is now more anecdotal. It used to be that you went to school from basically 18 to 22. You accumulated the occupational skills that you were going to need for the next 30 to 40 years, and you could monetize those skills over that period. The argument in the world of education today is that skills abatement, how quickly that skill becomes not monetizable, can't earn a living on it, has gone from 30 years to 4 to 5. So that's how quickly, because of the rate of technological change, skills are abating. And if that is the case, and we have strong anecdotal evidence to say that that is the case, then everybody needs to become a lifelong learner. and you need to constantly be reinventing yourself and upskilling and reskilling in order to make sure that you have the skills that are monetizable over a career.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like you need to be spending 10 or 15 or 20% of your time just building your skills on an ongoing basis, learning the latest software platform or the latest, Mural or Miro or, Rome Research or Notion, or, just always learning some new software platform and it's not about going back to school. It's just, you have to be investing in it.
Completely correct.
Ongoing
I
basis.
mean, look at Zoom. There were very few on-demand workers in February of 2020 that were not proficient in Zoom. Now everyone's proficient in Zoom.
Yeah.
Everyone had to upskill on that real quick. But Zoom was a province mostly of the on-demand remote worker before the pandemic. Now it's a province of everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jeff, where can people find you online if they want to find out more about what you have going on in your latest thinking?
Well, LinkedIn is always the best place to connect. I'm always happy to talk with people about the on-demand workforce, about the future of work, about the book. Certainly on Twitter at Jeffrey Wald. And then the book is, we were fortunate when we released the book a few months ago to hit #1 in all of Amazon's HR categories, and it's been super fun. And for the first time, Will, I can actually say, and now the book is available in bookstores nationwide as bookstores start to open again. And I will tell you, I certainly look forward to heading down to Union Square here in Manhattan and going to the Barnes & Noble and purchasing an in-person copy of my book.
That's fantastic. Well, we will include all of those links in the show notes. So follow Jeff on Twitter and, check him out on LinkedIn, buy the book. Jeff, it's been great having you on the show. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. It was super fun.